Hey guys, Caleb here with DSLR Video Shooter, and in this video I'm going to show you how you can take a cheap or old TV and turn it into a stunning virtual production set for your videos without using tracking software. All the shots you're about to see were created using a 55-inch $300 TV. So now that I hopefully have you hooked on this crazy idea, let's take a look at how I created those shots using basic gear, a TV, and a few tricks. First up, you're going to need some kind of display. Now I used a TV for this, but you could use a monitor or even a projector, which is what I did for my Ronin 4D review. When this idea first popped into my head, I did some research and found this Hisense 4K 55-inch TV, and it was $300 or just over 300 bucks on Amazon. I'll have a link to that down in the description. And what's really cool about this TV is it's LED, so it's lightweight, easy to move around, and it was cheap. I didn't want to use a TV that I might damage for something like this. But it also had Roku built in, which means I could take my phone or my computer and go ahead and mirror to the display to use different background images and videos. This is fantastic because you can quickly change the framing and make edits live on set, which is all fantastic, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Later on in the video, we'll talk more about TV specs and things you really want to keep in mind when using a display for this, but let's go ahead and jump into our first setup, which is going to involve taking our TV, laying it down flat on a desk, and filming it as kind of a video table. This setup is something I have not seen before, and with the right stock footage, it really does look incredible. By the way, no one is sponsoring this video, including stock footage companies, but this video is supported by those of you who have purchased my camera guides and LUTs. So if you're enjoying this video, please consider supporting future content by checking the links in the description. And thank you guys so much for the support. So after laying the TV down on its side, I grabbed a prop. For me, it was a lens and a camera, and I started messing around with a TV as a tabletop. I found some HUD stock footage online and was able to pull that into Final Cut, make some tweaks and modifications to the color and the size, and then simply mirror my computer screen directly onto the TV thanks to Roku, and this allowed me to very quickly get lots of different shots with all kinds of different custom looks. If you're filming by yourself, it's a great idea to turn on looping so that you can just have a shot loop over and over while you pan the camera and kind of nail your shot. It just helps ensure that you get the shot, especially when you're filming by yourself. Using a couple basic shapes, I also created my own animations, which is super easy to do in Final Cut or other software, and I really dug how these objects actually light your subject and turn the TV into a light source. It's super satisfying and it looks really, really great. So having things like a basic white bar pan across the TV or having white or red circles, things like that really do make this special. And one thing I love about this whole idea is that it is practical. That's a real TV with real lumens lighting your object. It's not a simple plug-in we're just slapping on our footage. It's practical and it just looks so, so good. At this point, I will say, it should go without saying, that you should be careful when placing things on top of your TV. This particular TV is very resilient and I was comfortable putting objects directly onto the screen. But if you have an OLED or more delicate screen, you might consider getting some plexiglass to go over your TV so that you don't damage it. But just be smart and keep that all in mind. When it comes to lighting, I used a simple LED light and a softbox off to one side, and sometimes used a white foam board to add some fill. I did find the larger your light source, the easier it is to work with, because you often have to have your lights further away so that you don't have reflections and glare on the TV, which is one of the biggest enemies of a setup like this, especially when you're dealing with a high gloss screen like the one I had. So at the end of the day, I was really happy with what I was able to capture with this. It kind of reminded me of like a Star Wars or Star Trek console, having different buttons and screens and HUDs. All looked really fantastic. And again, animating your own stuff really just looks so good, and you can go nuts with the setup like this. But now we're going to move on to our second setup, which involves putting the TV behind your subject and creating your own virtual backgrounds. Now you could use virtual production software to create worlds or use videos on the TV behind your subject, but I ended up just using basic photos that I got online, and I think it turned out fantastic. So for this setup, we have the TV behind our subject on another desk. We have our subject on something. I like to kind of create a foreground little set to match the background. So for this, I just used a basic Pelican style case. Then I took my camera and put a longer lens on, which is kind of important. If you have a wide lens, first of all, it's going to be hard to fill the whole frame with the TV. But secondly, with a longer lens, you're going to have more lens compression, which is going to kind of hide TV artifacts and things behind your subject. You also want to make sure your lens is somewhat fast. So I shot pretty much all of this at f2.8 on a Tamron lens set to around 55 millimeters. When it comes to projecting the backgrounds onto the TV, again, I really like using a Roku or Apple TV to be able to mirror your phone or computer. This does several things for you. First, it just makes it easy. You simply throw up whatever you want onto the TV and you're good to go. But more importantly, you can reframe those images and even color correct them if they look weird on your camera display. As an example, most landscape and interior shots are actually shot with a wide angle lens, and it just doesn't look right when you have it displayed behind your subject. However, by simply pinching to zoom, we can make it look like it was shot on a telephoto lens, and we can reframe, move the image around, find better perspectives and better lighting and better framing, which is super nice. And you can match the perspective and the angle, which is one of the best ways to sell this whole look and make it look real, which is the goal. As an example, if your camera is pointed down at your subject, you probably want your background to show the ground or steps or the floor or something. The inverse is also true. If you're filming kind of directly at or up toward your subject, you want to be able to see the ceiling or the sky. So having the ability to pinch in on a single image and get the ground or the sky or lights or whatever is just super convenient, and it allows you to get multiple different looks with a single image. Finally, when looking for images like this, look for lighting details, because remember, all of this is going to be out of focus, and you can take advantage of this and have some beautiful out of focus bokeh and lighting. For example, take a look at this shot. When we have it focused on the TV, it's a really boring, pretty low resolution photo, but once it's thrown out of focus and we're focused on our subject, it looks amazing. And another thing I love is throwing a manual vintage lens on the camera, like the bokeh on the edges of this particular image. I just love it, and it sells it even further. It takes something digital and makes it super duper organic. Lighting is very similar to our last setup, a single softbox and maybe some fill, but to make things even more interesting and sell the entire look on camera, I brought in an RGB light for some shots to match the color in the scene on the TV. For this, I use an Amaran F22C matte, but you could use any RGB light, of course, and it's just super easy to just dial in the color and the saturation and brightness to match as closely as possible the image on the TV. And I think in the end, things looked really close. Now for all the backgrounds, I personally just went with a basic image, but you could go with video, and that would add a lot of dynamic to your shot. The one thing you want to keep in mind is, again, being able to reframe things, but also you don't want the video to be moving. So you want a nice locked off static shot so that you're not having to fight things. And when it comes to camera movement with all of these setups, when you have a static image and you've zoomed in a little bit, you can pan around and it doesn't look fake. If, however, you're using all wide angle lenses, your perspective is going to shift so much more, so it's a lot harder to sell that. But again, I recommend shooting at 55 or longer. That allows you to pan around the TV without hitting the edges. So those are the two setups I went with and the shots I was able to achieve. Now let's talk about TVs and displays more in depth. So if you're going to be doing this, here's some things you really want to pay attention to when picking out a display, and you can go to Best Buy or a store and test these for yourself and see if there's going to be any issues. So the first thing you want to pay attention to is the number one issue you might run into, and that is flickering. Different TVs have different refresh rates, and so what you want to do is think about the frame rates you typically film at. For me, that's 24 frames per second, and then film the TV at different brightnesses and see if there's any strobing or flickering. Some TVs will flicker when they're dimmed down, while others will eliminate flickering once they're brighter. So don't be afraid to mess with the settings of the TV, and I found personally when the TV is brighter that I had no flickering at all, but if I turned it way down low, I ran into flickering. Okay, the next issue you might have is light bleed. This is usually a problem on cheaper TVs like the one I use, and that is that when the TV is off or there's almost nothing bright in the scene, it's very black. Blacks are black, whereas when you add something like that white bar that I had earlier, the areas that should be black start to take on a bunch of brightness. In some cases, they turn purple. This wasn't too much of a deal breaker for me. I was able to work around it, but keep in mind, some TVs are going to do great, like an OLED screen where there's going to be zero light bleed. That's just something to keep in mind on LEDs and back illuminated TVs. The next thing you want to pay attention to is the construction or the strength of your TV. Now, the one I had, again, is LED, and I knew as someone who owns an OLED at home that LED TVs are so much lighter and in some cases stronger. So I could simply grab this thing with my bare hands and just lay it down gently. You might need a friend just because of the size of the TV, but when it comes to the weight of the TV, it's super manageable. And there was a nice big flat area on the back, so I could just lay it directly down and not have any issues. But that is something to consider, and the strength of the actual TV if you're going to put things directly onto the panel. Okay, the next issue is a huge one, and this is going to be reflections. Now, some displays have anti-reflective surfaces. That may work totally fine for you. The one I bought is a reflective surface, which again, I think looks really cool to see your object reflected, but that means you're going to run into a lot of reflection issues potentially. Now, sometimes this looks really cool. For example, in this shot, I purposefully brought the light in to kind of make it look like I'm filming a control panel. For some other shots, I actually had a red LED light kind of bouncing around the room, and that kind of added to some ambiance. So if you're not going for pitch black or pure white looks, that could be something that's totally fine for you, but maybe you hate all of that and you want to go out and get an anti-reflective surface. Again, keep in mind that might mean that your blacks aren't super black, which means you may have some issues grading things in post. But again, you can test all of this when you go to a store and look at different TVs. Just bring your camera and see if you're going to have any reflection issues, see what black levels are like, and things like that. The next thing to consider is moire or pattern issues. So if you look at this shot, you'll notice that there's an area where my subject is in focus, but the TV is also in focus, the actual panel, and we're getting some moire issues. That's because this is a super cheap TV and the pixels are giant. So when you get up close to it, when the TV's on, you can make out individual little cubes. That's going to be a problem when it comes to focus. Now, if you shoot at a shallower depth of field, like f2.8, for example, you're probably going to be fine for most shots, but that is something to consider. A much higher quality TV is probably not going to have this issue, but that's another thing you can test. Film this display and kind of, change your focus or change the angle at how you're hitting the TV, maybe not directly on, but off to one side, and see if there's going to be any crazy issues. And again, keep in mind, if you're filming your subject and the TV is out of focus slightly, you should be okay. The next potential issue is viewing angles. For example, the TV I bought, when it's laid flat on a table and I'm filming from a certain angle, you'll notice that not the entire TV is black. And as I rotate the TV around, we start to lose contrast and things get really gray and kind of lit up. This means that I can't film from just any angle if I want a pitch black, part of the TV. I have to stick with right in front of the TV. I can change the angle, but I just can't rotate around. So some TVs will have this issue, some TVs won't. Again, a lot of OLED TVs do really well, especially LG. Those are the ones I have at home and they're fantastic. But that's something to pay attention to. Walk around the TV if you're shopping for one with your camera and see what happens. And finally, we have color and contrast. You don't want a TV that is super flat and has awful color, or at least you don't have the option to change colors. This TV is passable. You do have some control over color, saturation, brightness, and hue. So if things just look terrible, you can go in and manually shift things around. Another way to work around this is to have a good light that you can match your TV. So if your TV looks kind of green and warm, you can warm up your light and add a little bit of green to kind of match things and balance things out. But ideally, you just want a TV that has some good options. And the one that I have found and talked about already has been pretty good for me and enough options to get me by. That's gonna wrap up this video and this crazy TV idea. If you do something with this idea, I would love to see it on social media. If you'd like to support these videos, check out the information in the description. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next video.